to the series East, West, Home's Best. This is a series of programs in which individuals from different groups within the immigrant community talk about the countries from which they've come, their expectations of life in Britain, and their experiences and reactions since arriving here. Tonight, in the fourth of a group of programs presenting the voices and views of individuals from the West Indies and the Caribbean, we turn to the experience of a number of people from Guyana. And here to introduce the program is Sandra Naidu.
People who come from the West Indies are generally described as coming from the islands, the West Indian Islands or the Caribbean Islands, and by and large that's accurate enough. But of course it leaves out one large and distinct group of West Indians, the Guyanese. Their place of birth is Guyana, a country on the coast of the South American mainland. It's difficult to discover what influences filter through from Brazil and Venezuela and other South American neighbors, just as it's difficult to identify specific African and Indian and Chinese influences in the Guyanese people who are very much a mixture. Indeed, racially, Guyana is such a melting pot that coming to England can be quite traumatic, just because of that very English question, where do you come from?
I'm from Guyana, and we like to be called Guyanese. We don't like to be called West Indians for some reason or the other. We like to, know that we are from Guyana, and not from one of the islands. Not because we don't like to associate with the islands. We like the islands very much, because we are always on holiday over there. But it's just that we are on the continent of South America, and we like to, differentiate ourselves with the West Indians, except in cricket, I suppose.
The beauty about Guyana, which you really don't realize it, because you just take it for granted, like they have the buildings, which go back to the Dutch period, and then you had the Spanish period as well, and these buildings are still preserved, and it isn't. Well, the only time you really do appreciate it is that when you leave Guyana and you come to England and you see buildings and you say, well, we have just as nice buildings. Or then you really start to think back about the buildings that you've seen there, which before you never used to take any notice of it or try to inquire why they were built like that,
Well, buildings are mostly wooden buildings. And we have the largest wooden building in the world in the city, which is St. George's Cathedral, which is a very lovely building.
What struck me when I first arrived was I couldn't figure out why is it all the houses were together, and people, to me, I thought that it was just one house and just one family lived in it.
I thought really that it would have been, nicer than it is actually. I arrived at night, but the skyline, everything was grey, and the buildings in the early hours of the morning were very grey as well. They're very different from what I really expected it to be. I thought that, it would have been like in the tropical countries where you had separate houses and not all joined on as they are, at least in London. I heard of London being grey, but I never expected it to be quite as grey. Hardly ever seeing the sun.
When I came here first, it was midsummer, and it was about the best out summer they've had in this country. But I was freezing. It was terribly cold. And my brother, who was here for about 8 years, or before me, he kept saying to me, but you can't feel cold. It's very warm. I says, well, I'm sorry, I was very cold. I was wearing a couple of jumpers at a time in the midsummer. But I've been back to Guyana for 6 months, and I just could not settle down. The first thing which was against was the heat.
We have got Africans, Indians, East Indians, Chinese, Portuguese, Europeans, and Europeans not referring to the Portuguese. Somehow or the other we don't refer to the Portuguese as Europeans because they were one of the first settlers in Guyana. The Europeans went in after. But most important of all, the Amerindians, who were there as tribes long before any other race settled in Guyana. Everyone mixed socially more than racially. I mean, if you were of a certain social standard, you mixed with that standard.
When I first came to England, I never really even considered myself black, you know. At home we were considered colored if you were kind of a mixture like I was. And it's only when you came to England and you realize that anyone who is not white, whether he was mixed, whether he was pure African origins or Indian or whatever, once you come to this country you're black. The discrimination that one met was the same regardless of the, you know, the shade of your skin or the particular culture, whether it was Hindu or Christian, you know, or whatever it was. You were black if you everyone is generally called black, and that came as a bit of a shock, I must say.
On several occasions I was asked where I came from, and I said, of Guyana, and they said, what part of Africa is that, or what part of Jamaica is that? And before I ended up into a very long, outdrawn discussion, I left them in ignorance. I said, well, it's the west part of Africa, or the east part of Jamaica. Then they say, but you're an Indian, and no one understood that Asian people do live in Guyana. They think that we should look absolutely different to the Indians or to the Africans or something. But I can't tell the way I look.
First of all, people are terribly amazed. They say, where you're from? You tell them where you're from. You say, I came from a place called British Guyana. It's not Guyana, thank God. And then you say, well, where was that? And then they always said, my God, you do speak good English. You know, they were always amazed that one could speak English.
Well, you did think of yourself as Guyanese, because when I left the school, I mean, there were only about 4 colored people there in those days. And that included my 2 sisters, you know, and the rest were just another chap who was there. But you did think of yourself as a Guyanese still. But at the same time, you didn't find, well, I found that there wasn't a strong prejudice in those days. I got on much better, and people were much more helpful than they are today. You know? I had an uncle who lived in Tutenbeck, and sometimes when I used to go there, I got off at the wrong station, like Clapham, and which was miles away. And as I got out of Clapham, they had a newspaper seller, and he would say to me, you got off at the wrong station. The station you want is Tutenbeck, because he knew fully well where I was going, you know, and because they were known to be living in this area, and people just knew, well, oh yes, there's a colored family living in Tutenbeck. I enjoyed it because this is how I expected. This is the idea we were taught about England, the friendly country type of thing. You know, and then it wasn't until later on in life that I, you know, came across different prejudices.
I remember when I came to England here first, on my 3rd day, I didn't know what a pub was, because at home we never had pubs and things. And I wanted to buy some cigarettes one evening, and I was walking down the street, and I asked a lady, very politely, if she could direct me to some place where I can buy cigarettes. And she says, oh, clear off, you old blackie, I want to speak to you. And I laughed, because I thought she was terribly ignorant.
If they're your friends, they're very good friends. But it takes a very long time. They have to look at you well, thoroughly, and then accept you. And once you're accepted, you're there. It must be different, because in Guyana you want to be out. And being out of the house, then you see people much more often. You can time them when they go to work. The population is smaller. Everyone knows everyone automatically. Whereas in Britain, your next door neighbor, you could be as far as from here to Guyana, because they cease to exist as far as you're concerned. It's a different thing completely.
My mother never worked, but the modern wives do work, because you've got a maid ready to look after the children and a cook to do the cooking. And the maid takes the children out in the afternoons, so at least when you get home at 3 o'clock after school or 4 o'clock after an office job, you can rest or you can go out, because you have someone ready to look after the children in the afternoons. It is a more difficult life over here, because of course you have to do the cooking and the cleaning, and go to work and get back home and do the preparing again for next day, which is difficult.
One good thing, you see, I had my mother and my 3 sisters were here and my eldest brother. But we still lived a very close Guyanese life at home. In London, yes, in London we still live this type of life in which even from school days we were allowed to, from school we came home and we more or less stayed in among the family, because in Guyana it's a very close family. You know, nobody leaves the family to go and live on their own, you know. And so therefore when we came up we still had this idea in which we stayed together all the time. And friends that you met, they had to be allowed to come to your house. You weren't allowed to go out and run around the streets and play in the roads, things like that. You had to, you know, stay and find something to play. At first I used to see lots of English boys like playing football, and I used to think, oh, I'd like to do it. But then at the same time, in the back of my mind, I had this idea that it would be wrong. It wasn't something that my mother would like. You know, she would not like me to be playing in the streets.
I was kept in most of the time, and the children, being winter, they were kept in as well. They weren't, you know, as free as at home, where the sun is always shining and the children are always playing in the yard and running, you know, to each other's houses, playing in a friend's backyard, and a friend would be in our backyard. And it's more freedom in the tropics, I think, at least in Guyana.
I was 14, so my schooling was on a different standard. That I found that when I came to the schools here, subjects that I had already done, they weren't teaching, you know, like Latin. They never taught Latin, and the teaching system was a different system that I found out, in which it was easier. The teaching I found was easier than it was over there, not as strict as it is in Guyana, because it was a very strict Victorian teaching in which children were caned and things like that, which I found they weren't in England. If we answered a wrong question or something, we were given detention, while over here we weren't. We were just passed by and somebody else was asked the question and answer it, that was all. Well, I didn't like it. I just couldn't get to understand it in a sense like it would surprise me. You know, when I saw like some children at schools were even rude to teachers, and that surprised me, because I used to think, well, that's one thing you should never do, is be rude to a teacher, you know. That was like sacrilege.
And you find that the attitude towards learning is not as striking, is not as demanding, is not, the children do not really and truly come to school to grasp the opportunity to learn. Whereas in Guyana, the children want to learn, the parents want the children to learn, and the performance is better.
I thought the schools and everything, you know, well, they would have been heated to a certain degree, which would have been comfortable. And they were apparently, but I sent my son to school with his coat, not a jumper, but a shirt, a cotton shirt. And he found it very cold because he was sent outside. They had to go outside to play. And he went like that, you know, without a coat on. And he thought really that he didn't like the country. And the system was completely different because they were really grounded in the 3 R's as reading, writing, and arithmetic, much more than here. The primary schools here don't cater very much, you know, for those subjects in the primary school stages. But I think the secondary schools, they're much more advanced to a certain level than we are over there.
I joined the army, and I spent 6 years in the REMC, where I did venereology as a subject. After leaving the army, I went straight into Guy's Hospital, where I spent 10 years, and I left it 2 years ago. I'm now working for an oil company. In the army, it was much better. I used to be stared at by everybody because I wore a British uniform on the trains, on the buses, and it used to amaze me because I got very embarrassed when people kept out staring. I think it was the novelty. I can remember here in 1959 that a chap walked up to me and paid me a shilling if he could touch me before we backed a horse. Yeah, because in 59 it was always good luck if you touched a black person.
How did you feel?
Very good, actually, because I felt the novelty as well.
As it is, I've made my living in this country as an entertainer, and naturally things have been easy for me. In England, if you're black, if you're an entertainer, you've got a chance. If you're a popular entertainer, and if you're a cricketer, well, the thing is, if your one is always playing the part of a black man. You never play the part of just an ordinary human being. They don't just cast a black actor, if he's good, in an ordinary part. No, you're always seen as a black man.
Looking for jobs here in England, they were harder in a sense because there were many people who were willing to give you jobs, but they were prepared only to give you a job to a certain standard. You weren't allowed to go any further than that or even apply to get a job any higher. I've been to jobs, especially when I left school, I thought, well, I was going to be an artist, because I like drawing, and I've given many interviews to go into the advertising firms. And I went into many of them, in which I was told that, oh yes, I can work there. They would give me a job as an office boy working with an artist, but I will be like this for another 5 or 6 years. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that, because I can understand you have to be started somewhere, be taught something. But they more or less made it that this is exactly what you'll be doing, You'll be there to make his tea, get his do his errands, but when it comes to actually being taught some things, you won't have been. So you've been an office boy the rest of your life. So eventually, I was called up to do my national service. And I went in the Air Force. And when I was in the Air Force, I went in for 2 years at first. And I decided, well, to stay in, and I stayed in for 5. And being in the Air Force, you seem to get a slightly better treatment with people. Especially when they see you're in uniform, they think, well, that's good, it's nice. And you seem to get on very well. You can go into places where people are very kind to you then.
I feel that there are certain classes of people in England who reacts badly to any foreigner. And I feel, or personally, it's because it's the fear of not knowing them. And on the other hand, there are lots of black people in this country who reacts equally badly to white people. Not because they're white and they're black, it's the fear of not knowing.
One man, I said to him, do you feel any different when you are around with me? He said, no, he never thinks of color at all unless I mention it. It's just a good friend of ours, and I feel the same.
In Britain, British. If I am in Britain and I earn my living in Britain, I am a citizen, I'm a British citizen, and I give 100% towards Britain.
You see, we always remember all the bad things that happened to us, and not the good things. But equally, I'm quite sure, because I'm a very happy person, and I enjoyed, lots of good years in Guyana and lots of good years in England. While I was in England, I had the opportunity of doing lots of traveling. I've been to the Far East and to Australia and to Cyprus and Germany and to Honolulu. I've been on the world nearly already since I've been here. And I've enjoyed, because it was a marvelous experience and education. There are lots of different people. Now, I spent 2 years in Malaya when I was in the army. And I did very well, because I was the only colored soldier with a battalion of 1,000 men. Black people have a way of identifying wherever they go with other black people. And I got on very well out in Malaya because I was black.
For freedom and spare time, Guyana is ideal. Here, for freedom and spare time, it's not as ideal, but you have more opportunities over here. For example, one's views would be widened much more because there are so many places that you could go to. Concerts, the theater, libraries, for example. They're so much more advanced than the libraries in Guyana. There's so much more scope, really, for children growing up. They're able to come in here, use the catalogue and sit and study. While at home, they do that, but they haven't got that sort of freedom of the catalogue. You know, they have to be asking every time they'd like a book. Here, they are taught how to use the catalogue from very small, the children. And as they grow up, they know to use the catalogue without asking very many questions.
If I went out to the pictures, I had to go with my sisters, and which is something we also did at home. Because at home, we went out anywhere, I had to take my sisters with me and my brother. We all had to go out as a family. We just couldn't go out by ourselves and say, well, I'm going to the pictures, but I have to see if my sisters wanted to come, or if they don't want to come, then I can go by myself, but I must take them with me. You had all this in mind to bear, that whatever you do would not only reflect on you, but it will also reflect your family. That was in Guyana, but in London, because it's such a bigger and more people are moving around, and people tend to mind their own business in many ways, you feel like, okay, I can get away with this, providing that I don't run across somebody I know.
Well, I never went to the theatre in Guyana before, nor did I go to orchestral concerts, because at the time, when I left, there was just amateur theatre, and there were concerts, but not orchestral. An English friend, introduced me to that sort of life, and I like it very much. The first time I went, it was at the festival hall, to a concert. And the next time I went to Covent Gardens, where I saw Swan Lake, which was very good. It was just something different, altogether different from what we've ever had. For example, there wasn't ballet as such at home. We had amateur ballet, but nothing at all like this. The scenery and everything, there was more scope for that. It was definitely appreciated more than what we would do at home. Everyone is so very quiet when you go to a concert or when you go to the theatre. No one, you can even hear a pin fall, while at home you still could hear a bit of whispering or a little talking, when something, probably something is said that one appreciates. Everyone sounds very happy about it and makes a little noise. Might be a little applause or something, while over here that isn't done.
Oh, I do many things that are English, perhaps without even realizing it. I go to pubs. I used to play football at school, and I used to go to football matches over here. With your scarves, and you had these rattles. It was all part of going to a football match, and yet, although they have football in Guyana, I couldn't have gone to the matches as I would have gone in England, because the Guyanese would have said to me, just what he thinks he's doing,
We were educated as Christians. We went to church. We had the same kind of Victorian kind of values. I was kind of very middle class. My father was a minister. Anyway, when I came to England, I got a shock. Your seats, you learn very quickly. Everybody gets the message within, a week of coming to England. And so you begin to start to look for your own roots, because I really do believe that even if one tried like mad to be assimilated within the culture, or to be as English as possible, you could never really be assimilated. You see, I don't think that even the Jews have maintained their family unity as much as they possibly can, and they still have not been really integrated. If it was impossible to integrate people of, say, white skin, how would it be possible to integrate people of dark skin?
This is very difficult. I was looking at cricket on television, and obviously I was supporting the West Indian side. And my two daughters, they were both supporting the English side. I think here is one of the situations that we'll all get into. All of us who who have immigrated here and who have got children born here, there'll be split loyalties. And I think that this will only last until they are old enough to identify what they want to. But they know it. Oh, daddy's from Guyana, and mommy is from Trinidad. But they're English. They're English. Oh, yes.
In my case, you see, my daughter she can choose because she looks European. She can choose, but I know that in her heart she's very black. But that's a good thing. If everyone were black in their heart, in other words, could see the other person's point of view. I mean, if the average English person could recognize that black people have something to offer them, just if it's just mere humanity, you know. And I would say much more than humanity, because I think black people are very beautiful people. The mixtures are fantastic. They would give some, you know, they could revitalize the English.
That was the 6th program in the series East, West, Home's Best. It was compiled and presented by Sandra Naidu, and the producer was John Thomas. The program was first broadcast in July of last year. Now, so far in this series, we've listened to the voices and views of people from India and Pakistan and from various countries in the West Indies and the Caribbean. In the next 2 programs, we turn to the African experience of life in Britain with the views of people from Kenya, that's next Thursday evening, and then the following week from Nigeria. That's the next 2 programs in the series East, West, Home's Best on Thursday evenings at 7 o'clock here on Radio 3 Medium Wave.